Welcome back. In Part 1, we explored how total control is built through surveillance, fear, and psychological pressure. In Part 2, we saw how reality itself can be manipulated by rewriting the past and reshaping truth. But today, we turn to something more intimate, something power cannot fully predict, something deeply human: emotion, connection, love, and the quiet desire to resist. George, after everything we've discussed, total surveillance, mental control, manipulation of truth, one question keeps coming back to me. If a system controls everything, why do people still feel the urge to rebel?
Because control can regulate behavior, but it struggles to fully eliminate human experience. Even under extreme pressure, people still feel loneliness. They still crave intimacy. They still long to be seen, understood, valued. These are not political instincts, they're human instincts. And anything that exists outside political control becomes a threat to absolute power.
Let's talk about something surprising. In this system, even love is considered dangerous. Not just rebellion, not just protest, love. Why?
Because love creates loyalty that does not belong to authority. If two people care deeply about each other, their emotional priority shifts. They begin to value something more than obedience. And once something matters more than the system is no longer absolute.
So emotional attachment divides allegiance.
Yes, power demands total loyalty, but love redirects loyalty toward another human being. That is intolerable for a system that requires emotional monopoly.
Emotional monopoly, that's a powerful phrase. Meaning the system doesn't just want obedience, it wants to be the primary object of feeling.
Exactly. It wants fear directed toward it, gratitude directed toward it, devotion directed toward it. Any emotion that exists independently weakens its psychological dominance.
Let's bring this into the personal experience of individuals, particularly Winston Smith and Julia. Their connection isn't just romance, it feels like something more fundamental, almost like rediscovering what it means to be human.
That's exactly what it represents. Their bond is not simply attraction, it is recognition. Recognition that another person also feels constrained. Recognition that private thoughts still exist. Recognition that authentic emotion is still possible. In a world of performance and surveillance, genuine connection becomes revolutionary.
So the rebellion doesn't begin with ideology, it begins with feeling.
Yes, the first act of resistance is often emotional, not political. Before someone challenges authority publicly, they experience a private realization. This is not right. I am not fully alive. There must be something more. That internal awakening is the true beginning of rebellion.
There's something psychologically fascinating about secrecy in their relationship. The act of sharing something hidden seems to intensify its importance. Why is secrecy so powerful?
Because secrecy creates a protected space, a psychological territory beyond authority's reach. Even if the physical world is controlled, the knowledge that something exists privately between two people creates a sense of autonomy. It restores the feeling of ownership over experience.
So secrecy becomes a form of freedom.
Yes, even small acts of privacy can feel immense when privacy is forbidden. A whisper, a glance, a shared memory. These become acts of resistance, not because they are dramatic, but because they are independent.
Let's look at this from the perspective of power. Why is emotional authenticity more dangerous than intellectual disagreement?
Because intellectual disagreement can be argued with, punished, or re-educated. But genuine emotional experience is harder to regulate. It is spontaneous, it is deeply rooted, it often operates beneath conscious control. You can force someone to repeat words, you can force someone to act obediently, but forcing someone to feel differently is far more difficult.
Unless you break them psychologically.
Yes. And that is precisely why systems of total control eventually move toward emotional domination, not just behavioral compliance. The ultimate goal is not simply obedience. The ultimate goal is emotional alignment.
But here's the tragedy. Inner resistance feels powerful, yet it's incredibly fragile. Why is it so vulnerable?
because it exists inside individuals who are isolated, watched, and constantly threatened. Fear does not only punish resistance, it erodes the emotional strength required to sustain it. Hope requires energy, trust requires courage, authenticity requires safety. Without these, resistance struggles to survive long-term.
So even genuine connection exists under pressure, like a fragile structure in a hostile environment.
Yes, and that pressure constantly tests loyalty, courage, and psychological endurance.
This brings us to one of the most profound questions in the entire story. If fear becomes strong enough, if pressure becomes constant enough, if suffering becomes unbearable enough, can love survive?
That question lies at the emotional center of everything. Because if love can be destroyed, if loyalty can be redirected, if trust can be broken from within, then power has achieved not just external control, but internal transformation.
Let's step back and look at the bigger picture. Part 1 showed us control over behavior. Part 2 showed us control over truth. Now Part 3 shows us control over emotion. So here's the deeper philosophical question. What does it actually mean to remain human in a world designed to reshape the human mind? Is humanity defined by memory, by truth, by freedom, by love? Or is it defined by the refusal to surrender those things, even when survival demands it?
That is the core conflict, not just between individuals in power, but between survival and identity. Is it better to live safely without authenticity, or risk everything to remain internally free?
Today, we explored something deeply personal, the emotional dimension of control. We've seen that power does not just seek obedience, it seeks emotional ownership. It seeks loyalty at the deepest psychological level. And yet, even in the most controlled environment imaginable, something persists. The desire to connect, the need to feel, the impulse to resist. But the question remains, how much pressure can the human heart endure before it changes? And in Part 4, we confront the final and most unsettling question of all. If power no longer tries to control people, but tries to redefine what a person is. Welcome back. We've reached the final part of our discussion. Let's briefly reflect on the path we've taken. In Part 1, we saw how power controls behavior through surveillance and fear. In Part 2, we explored how power controls reality by rewriting truth and history. In Part 3, we looked at emotional life, connection, and inner resistance. But now, we arrive at the final and most disturbing stage. Not controlling what people do, not controlling what people believe, not even controlling what they feel, but controlling who they are at the deepest psychological level. George, what is the ultimate goal of absolute power?
The ultimate goal is not obedience. Obedience can still contain silent disagreement. It can still contain hidden resentment. It can still contain private resistance. True absolute power wants something more extreme. It wants people to genuinely accept domination, internally, completely, permanently. Not forced agreement, not fearful compliance, but sincere acceptance. Power that seeks the inner surrender.
So the system is not satisfied when people obey. It wants people to agree, emotionally and mentally.
Yes, because as long as a person secretly disagrees, a part of them remains free. That private space, even if invisible, is a threat. So the final objective is simple. Eliminate the difference between what a person says and what they truly believe.
Which means power must enter the most protected place a human has, the inner self.
Exactly. And this is where the role of figures like O'Brien becomes crucial. They don't merely punish disobedience, they guide psychological transformation. Their purpose is not to silence opposition, but to reshape perception itself, breaking the last form of freedom.
Let's talk about the last form of freedom a person can hold, private conviction. Even if someone loses external freedom, they can still internally think, "This is wrong. I do not accept this." I remain myself. Why is that so threatening to power?
Because identity is built from belief. If a person continues to believe something independently, they remain psychologically separate from authority. And separation, even invisible separation, means control is incomplete.
So the system must remove not only rebellion, but the capacity for independent conviction.
Yes, the goal is not just submission of behavior, but submission of reality inside the mind.
The symbol of absolute authority. This brings us to one of the most powerful symbols of domination, Big Brother. Not just a political leader, but something almost mythic. Why is such a figure so effective psychologically? Because symbolic authority is more powerful than physical authority. A symbol can represent permanence, omniscience, protection, fear, order. It becomes larger than any individual, almost beyond questioning. When people emotionally internalize such a symbol, obedience becomes personal devotion. So power becomes psychological presence, always felt, even when not physically present.
Yes, and when authority exists inside the mind, external enforcement becomes less necessary. The destruction of the independent self.
Let's go deeper into the psychological transformation itself. What happens when a person is pressured long enough, intensely enough, consistently enough?
The mind seeks stability. When reality becomes unbearable, it looks for a way to reduce internal conflict. If resisting creates suffering and accepting reduces suffering, the mind gradually moves toward acceptance, not because acceptance is true, but because it is survivable.
So psychological survival can require surrender.
Yes, and when survival depends on surrender repeatedly, surrender becomes habit. Eventually, the person no longer remembers what resistance felt like. The most terrifying possibility.
Here is the most disturbing idea we've encountered in this entire discussion. What if power doesn't just force people to obey, but actually changes what they believe is real, what they feel is right, what they love, what they fear? What if power reshapes the human mind so completely that resistance becomes impossible, not physically, but psychologically?
Then power has achieved total victory, because domination is no longer external. It has become internal structure. The philosophical endpoint.
So we arrive at the ultimate philosophical question. If a person's memories can be changed, if their emotions can be redirected, if their beliefs can be replaced, if their identity can be reconstructed, what remains of the original person?
That question has no comfortable answer. It forces us to confront something deeply unsettling. Is the self something permanent or something that can be rewritten under enough pressure? What power ultimately wants?
Let's summarize the full arc of control we've explored across this entire series. Power begins by watching people, then it frightens them, then it isolates them, then it controls truth, then it reshapes emotion, and finally, it remakes the human mind itself.
Yes, and at that point, power is no longer imposed on society. It becomes the structure of society, the structure of thought, the structure of identity.
The final question for the listener. So here is where we leave our listeners with the most important question of all. If freedom can disappear gradually, if truth can be rewritten, if love can be pressured, if identity can be reshaped, what must a person protect first to remain truly free? Memory, truth, emotion, independent thought, or the courage to question even when questioning is dangerous?
Perhaps freedom is not a condition that exists automatically. Perhaps it survives only when people actively protect it, internally and externally.
Closing the series. And that brings us to the end of our journey. We didn't just explore a political system, we explored the limits of human psychology, the fragility of truth, the vulnerability of identity, and the immense power of belief. This story asks a question that reaches far beyond fiction. Not just what kind of world could exist, but what kind of human being could exist inside it. And that question stays with you long after the discussion ends. Thank you for listening.